The Zarkoth Empire had conquered 47 star systems in less than 3 centuries. Their method was simple and worked every single time. They would arrive at a primitive world and show their massive ships and powerful weapons. Then they would give the inhabitants a choice that was really no choice at all. Submit and become servants or die and let your entire species vanish from existence. Every single species they encountered chose to live even if it meant living on their knees. The Zarkoth thought Earth would be exactly the same. Commander Vexlar stood on the bridge of his conquest vessel, watching the blue and green planet rotate slowly on his screen. His species had 4 arms and a face covered in bone plates with mandibles that clicked when he was pleased. Right now those mandibles were clicking happily. The planet below was called Earth, and the creatures living there called themselves humans. They were barely able to travel in space and only had tiny colonies on their moon. Perfect targets for slavery. Vexlar turned to his second officer, whose name was Krelthas. The officer was checking the scan results and nodding his large head. They had counted the population carefully. 7 billion humans lived on that planet. 7 billion new workers for the Empire. They would mine asteroids and build ships and serve their Zarkoth masters. It was how the universe worked. The strong ruled and the weak obeyed. The commander activated his translation device and prepared to send the standard message. He had given this same speech 47 times before. Every time it worked. The primitives always understood that resistance meant death. They always chose slavery over extinction. Humans would be no different. Down on Earth, a woman named Helen Morrison sat in a room deep underground beneath a building called the White House. She was the president of a nation called the United States. Around her sat military generals and scientists and advisors. They had been watching the alien ship for 3 hours. It just hung there in orbit like a dark moon. Every attempt to talk to it had been ignored until now. A general named Paul Crawford spoke first. He was an old soldier with gray hair and hard eyes. He told the president they were receiving a transmission. Everyone in the room went quiet. The voice that came through the speakers was cold and mechanical. It had no emotion at all. The voice said it belonged to Commander Vexlar of the Zarkoth Empire. It said Earth had been selected for integration into their domain. The humans would surrender their governments and their weapons and their freedom. In exchange, they would be allowed to live as servants. They had 12 hours to comply. Any resistance would result in the complete elimination of the human species. Then the voice stopped and the transmission ended. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Helen Morrison looked at the faces around her. She saw anger and fear and determination. She saw people who had spent their entire lives defending their country, now facing a threat from the stars. She asked General Crawford what their options were. The general admitted their options were limited. Their weapons were designed to fight other humans on Earth, not alien starships in space. The alien vessel was enormous, and their scans showed it had incredibly powerful shields and weapons. But Crawford said they had some assets the aliens might not expect. He said arrogance could be exploited. A scientist named Lisa Martinez leaned forward. She was young but brilliant. She pointed out something important. The aliens had given them 12 hours. That meant the aliens did not see humans as a real threat. They were arrogant and thought this would be easy. The director of an intelligence agency named Kevin Hughes agreed. He said arrogance was a weakness they could use. President Morrison stood up. Her face was set with determination. She told them to contact every leader of every nation on Earth. If these aliens thought humanity would surrender without a fight, then they were about to learn a very hard lesson. Humans had not climbed to the top of their food chain by giving up. They had done it by fighting and winning against every predator and every threat. All across the planet, similar conversations were happening. In Beijing and Moscow and London and Paris and Delhi and Tokyo, leaders were making the same choice. Humanity had spent thousands of years fighting each other. They had perfected the art of war through countless conflicts. Now they would turn all that knowledge and skill against a common enemy. Old hatreds and rivalries meant nothing when faced with extinction. Commander Vexlar waited calmly on his ship. He expected a message of surrender within a few hours. That was how it always went. The primitives would argue among themselves for a while, and then reality would set in. They would realize they had no chance and would submit. It was inevitable. But 6 hours after the ultimatum, something unexpected happened. Instead of a surrender, Earth responded with action. Every nation that possessed nuclear missiles launched them all at once. Hundreds of missiles screamed up through the atmosphere. They were not aimed at each other. They were all aimed at the alien ship hanging in orbit above them. Krell thus shouted a warning. Commander Vexlar felt his mandibles stop clicking. He was annoyed but not worried. These were primitive atomic weapons. His shields could stop them easily. He ordered the defensive screens activated and prepared to teach the humans the price of defiance. He would destroy their largest cities and break their will to resist. But something strange happened. The missiles did not arm their nuclear warheads. Instead, they exploded in a pattern around the ship, creating a cloud of debris and metal fragments. Vexlar did not understand what the humans were trying to do. Then the second wave hit, and he understood perfectly. Hidden in the debris were devices that created massive electromagnetic pulses. They all detonated at the same time. The Dominion's fist went completely dark. Every system shut down. Backup power started coming online, but it would take precious seconds. Seconds the humans used perfectly. The next attack came from satellites, but these were not normal satellites anymore. The humans had attached long rods made of dense metal to them. They dropped these rods straight down using nothing but gravity. The rods fell faster and faster until they hit the alien ship with the force of nuclear weapons. The kinetic energy was devastating. Hull plates cracked and split. Atmosphere vented into space. On Earth, lasers that had been designed to shoot down missiles were aimed upward. The alien shields were still recovering from the electromagnetic pulse. The lasers burned into the hull, creating more damage. Vexlar found himself lying on the floor of his bridge. Alarms were screaming. Half his crew was dead or injured. This was impossible. The primitives should not have been able to hurt them. President Morrison watched the satellite images showing the damaged alien vessel. People in the command room were cheering. General Crawford warned her it was not enough to destroy the ship, but they had hurt it badly. More importantly, they had sent a message. They had shown the aliens that humans would fight back. Morrison ordered a communication channel open to the alien ship. When Commander Vexlar's face appeared on the screen, she looked directly at him. Her eyes showed no fear, only cold determination. She told him he had made a mistake. He had assumed humans would be like the other species he had conquered. He had assumed fear would make them obey, but he did not understand what humanity was. Humans were not prey that froze when facing a predator. Humans were the predators who had learned to hunt the hunters. She gave him 12 hours to leave their star system. If he was still there when time ran out, they would show him exactly why he should have chosen a different planet to threaten. The transmission ended. Vexlar sat in his damaged ship and felt something he had never experienced in his entire military career. He felt doubt. He felt the first cold touch of fear. These humans were different from every other species he had encountered. They did not react with terror. They reacted with violence and strategy and coordination. His officer Krelthas suggested calling for reinforcements. He said this species was different and dangerous. Vexlar's pride fought against his survival instinct. He refused to admit he needed help to conquer primitives. He ordered the ground assault forces prepared. They would take the major cities by force and break the human resistance. It was his second mistake. The first had been coming to Earth at all. Commander Vexlar refused to accept defeat from primitives. His ship was damaged but still functional. He had 20,000 warriors ready to deploy to the surface. Each warrior wore advanced armor and carried plasma weapons that could burn through steel. They would land in 3 locations and show the humans what real military power looked like. The first landing site was chosen near a city called Dallas in a place the humans called Texas. Lieutenant Krazathor led the first wave down to the surface. The dropships cut through the atmosphere with their shields glowing red from the heat. They landed in an open field just as the sun was rising. The warriors emerged from their ships with weapons ready. They expected to see panicking civilians or maybe some scattered soldiers with primitive guns. Instead, they found nothing but empty fields and silence. Krazathor ordered his warriors to spread out and advance toward the city. They had barely walked 200 meters when the ground beneath them exploded. Buried bombs detonated in a carefully planned sequence. The Zarkoth shields could stop energy beams and bullets, but the shockwave from high explosives still threw them through the air like leaves in a storm. Before they could recover, the real attack began. A human named Jake Morrison watched through binoculars from a hidden position 2 kilometers away. He was a colonel in the army and had spent the last 6 hours preparing this ambush. He spoke calmly into his radio and gave the order to open fire. Thousands of soldiers who had been hiding in concealed positions began shooting at once. The weapons they used were not standard military rifles. Engineers had worked through the night modifying every weapon they could find. Heavy machine guns fired special ammunition made from depleted uranium, anti-tank rifles that could punch through armored vehicles, and something completely new that scientists had rushed from experimental laboratories. These were electromagnetic railguns that used magnetic fields to launch projectiles at incredible speeds. The Zarkoth shields flickered and died under the sustained fire. The aliens were tough and their natural armor was strong, but they could bleed and die just like any living creature. Krasthor watched in horror as his warriors fell. This was not how conquests were supposed to work. The primitives should have been frozen with fear, not launching coordinated ambushes with weapons designed specifically to kill Zarkoth soldiers. He ordered his remaining warriors to retreat back to the landing zone, but when they tried to run, they found the dropships were gone. The ships had been called away to help at the other landing sites where similar disasters were happening. Krasthor and his warriors were trapped in enemy territory with no way to escape. At the second landing site near a city called Warsaw in Poland, the Zarkoth encountered a different nightmare. The European military forces had turned the entire city into a trap. Every building had been rigged with explosives. Every street had hidden firing positions. The aliens advanced into the urban area, expecting to terrorize the population. Instead, they found empty buildings that collapsed on them and streets that became kill zones. A sniper named Hannah Berg lay on the 20th floor of an office building. She was from Sweden and had been chosen for this mission because she was one of the best marksmen in Europe. Next to her was her spotter, who helped her calculate distance and wind. They were not using normal bullets. Scientists had given them experimental ammunition with special tips made from materials that disrupted the alien shield technology. Hannah looked through her scope and found her target. She could see a Zarkoth officer with darker armor and more decorations than the regular soldiers. She controlled her breathing and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. 2 kilometers away, the alien commander's head snapped back as the bullet punched through his shield and skull. Without their leader, the alien formation fell apart in confusion. The third landing site was near Shanghai in China. The Chinese military had mobilized millions of soldiers in just a few hours. But more impressive than the soldiers was what they did with civilian technology. They took thousands of small flying drones that people used for photography and racing. Engineers modified each drone to carry a small explosive charge. When the Zarkoth landed, they were attacked by swarms of these tiny machines. The drones came in waves like angry insects. There were so many that the alien point defense weapons could not shoot them all down. The drones targeted weak points in the armor, especially joints and the vision sensors in their helmets. When they hit, they exploded, doing small amounts of damage individually but devastating damage in large numbers. A colonel named Liu Wei directed the attack from a mobile command vehicle. He had studied military history his entire life, especially guerrilla warfare and tactics used by weaker forces against stronger enemies. The aliens had better technology, but they fought like a conventional army. They could be overwhelmed by unconventional methods. He ordered the second wave to deploy. This time it was not physical weapons but electronic warfare. Hackers from China's cyber warfare divisions had been studying the signals captured from the alien ship. They discovered that the Zarkoth soldiers used networked communication systems in their helmets. The hackers could not break the alien encryption, but they could flood the frequencies with interference and corrupted data. A young specialist named Chen Lin typed commands rapidly on her keyboard. She was not trying to hack into the alien network. She was simply jamming it with noise and false information. The Zarkoth warriors suddenly found their helmet displays going dark or showing incorrect data. They could not communicate with each other or coordinate their movements. Blind and confused, they began to panic and retreat. On the command ship, Vexillar watched the tactical displays with growing disbelief. All 3 landing forces were being destroyed or driven back. Casualties were approaching 60%. This should have been impossible. He demanded to know how primitives could be defeating his trained warriors. Kreltha showed him captured human communications. The humans were adapting faster than any species the Zarkoth had ever encountered. In just 12 hours since the ultimatum, they had modified weapons and developed new tactics and coordinated a global defense. Every weakness the Zarkoth had was being exploited ruthlessly. Vexillar made a decision born of rage and desperation. He ordered all ground forces recalled. He would bombard the planet from orbit. He would turn their cities into molten glass and burn their civilization to ashes. The Council of Dominion had rules against destroying potential slave populations, but Vexillar no longer cared about rules. This species was too dangerous to be allowed to survive. Before he could give the firing order, new alarms began screaming throughout the ship. His sensor officer reported multiple launches from the planet's surface. These were not missiles this time. These were spacecraft, crude and cobbled together from existing technology but functional. Space shuttles that should have been in museums had been armed with weapons. Experimental craft that were not ready for flight had been pressed into emergency service. Even vehicles owned by wealthy civilians had been militarized and launched. At the front of this ragtag fleet was a shuttle called the Liberty. A man named Daniel Brooks sat in the commander's seat. He was an Air Force pilot with decades of experience. Next to him was Sophie Turner, who had been a NASA astronaut. She checked their weapon systems and shook her head at the insanity of what they were doing. She told Daniel this was crazy. They were attacking an alien starship in a retrofitted shuttle that was supposed to be in a museum. Daniel smiled grimly and replied that crazy was what humans did best. They did not need to win this fight. They just needed to hurt the aliens badly enough that they would think twice about staying at Earth. The Liberty fired first. Experimental lasers that were designed to shoot down missiles focused their beams on the sections of the alien ship that were already damaged from the earlier attack. The shields were still not at full strength. The other human spacecraft joined in, swarming around the massive enemy vessel, like small predators attacking a large wounded animal. They were outmatched and outgunned. Several of the human craft were destroyed in the first minute of combat, but the survivors kept coming, kept firing, kept doing damage. They showed no fear and no hesitation. Some of them deliberately rammed their spacecraft into crucial sections of the alien ship, sacrificing themselves to cause maximum damage. On Earth, in a hidden location in Wyoming, scientists completed their most desperate project. They had taken everything learned from scanning the alien ship and combined it with human nuclear technology. The result was a weapon they called the Hail Mary. It was crude and might not even work, but it was humanity's best chance. A scientist named Raymond Carter ran the final calculations. He warned the military commanders that the weapon would create a massive directional nuclear explosion channeled through electromagnetic fields. If it worked, it would punch through the alien shields. If it failed, they would all be enslaved or dead anyway. General Crawford gave the order to fire. The weapon launched skyward. It was not elegant or beautiful. It was simply the product of human desperation and ingenuity, and the absolute refusal to surrender. Commander Vexillar saw it coming. His officers screamed warnings, but the ship could not move fast enough while under attack from multiple directions. The H. Commander Vexillar found himself on the floor of his bridge, surrounded by smoke and sparks and the bodies of his crew. Half of them were dead. The ship was crippled and dying. Alarms screamed from every direction. He had never lost a battle before. He had never even imagined losing to primitives. But reality was undeniable. The humans had beaten him. He pulled himself up and looked at the view screen. The human spacecraft were holding position around his ship. They were not attacking anymore, but they were ready to resume fire at any moment. Vexillar knew he had only one choice left. He activated the emergency beacon and sent a message to any Zarkoth vessel that might receive it. He classified Earth as a Class Alpha threat. He warned that the species was extremely hostile and possessed unexpected capabilities. He requested immediate fleet support. On Earth, President Morrison watched the satellite feeds showing the crippled alien ship floating in orbit. People around her were celebrating, but she remained focused. She asked if they could communicate with the alien commander. General Crawford confirmed they had an open channel. Morrison told them to connect her. When Vexillar's face appeared on the screen, he looked different than before. His bone plates were cracked. His eyes showed something humans recognized instantly. He was afraid. Morrison looked directly at him and spoke calmly. She said she believed he wanted to have a conversation about surrender now. This time humans would discuss the terms. Vexillar tried to maintain some dignity. He said the humans had won a single battle, but the Empire would send more ships, larger fleets. Earth could not stand against the full might of the Zarkoth. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. General Crawford leaned into view and explained something to the alien commander. The humans had just captured Zarkoth technology. The crippled ship was full of systems that human scientists would reverse engineer. Weapons and shields and faster-than-light drives. Everything the aliens had brought would be studied and copied. A scientist named Lisa Martinez joined the conversation. She told Vexlar that human teams were already collecting debris from the damaged sections of his ship. They had been doing it for hours. She explained that they understood how his shields worked now. The technology used quantum frequency modulation. It was clever, but once humans understood the principle, they could counter it and replicate it. She estimated they would have working prototypes within months. Vexlar felt cold fear spreading through his body. These humans were not just fighting back. They were learning and adapting at a speed he had never seen before. Morrison continued speaking. She said the Empire could send more fleets, but each ship they sent would just be more technology for humans to study. Each battle would teach humanity more about how to fight the Zarkoth. Each attack would make Earth stronger. She gestured and the screen split to show images from across the planet. Factories were being converted to military production. Scientists worked in laboratories around the clock. Military forces trained with new weapons and tactics. Construction crews built defensive installations around every major city. Morrison explained that all of this had been accomplished in just 12 hours. She asked Vexlar to imagine what humans would do with 12 days or 12 months. A military officer from Japan named Yuki Tanaka spoke next. He explained a concept from human history about waking a sleeping giant. It meant that sometimes a peaceful nation, when attacked, would mobilize for total war. Vexlar had just woken 7 billion giants. Every human on the planet now had a common enemy and a reason to unite. Vexlar accessed his database trying to understand these creatures better. What he found horrified him. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other. They had perfected warfare across their entire history. Every major technological advancement they made was often weaponized. They had created bombs powerful enough to destroy their own civilization multiple times over. They had done all of this while trapped on one planet fighting amongst themselves. Now they were united against an external threat. Morrison asked what the commander wanted. Vexlar had no good options left. He could refuse to cooperate and watch as humans took his ship apart piece by piece, or he could provide information in exchange for being allowed to leave. The choice was obvious, even though it burned his pride. He asked what the humans wanted to know. An intelligence director named Kevin Hughes took over the questioning. He wanted to know everything about the Zarkoth Empire, military strength and territorial holdings and allies and enemies, and most importantly, weaknesses. Vexlar hesitated. To provide this information would be betraying the Empire, but looking at the determination in the human faces, he realized something. These humans would find out eventually anyway. They would study his ship and intercept communications and piece together the information. He could either help them now and survive or resist and die for nothing. Over the next several hours, Vexlar told them everything. The galaxy was crowded with intelligent species. Most lived under the control of various empires and federations. The Zarkoth were expansionist but not the worst threat out there. There were others far more dangerous. He described faster-than-light travel and energy weapons and technologies that humans had not even dreamed of yet. Dr. Martinez took notes frantically as Vexlar described the principles of FTL drives. General Crawford mapped the locations of Zarkoth military bases. Director Hughes learned about the political structure of the Empire and its rivals. President Morrison absorbed everything and was already planning humanity's next moves. She asked how long before the Empire sent another fleet. Vexlar explained that Earth's star was far from major hyperspace routes. The isolation that had protected humans for so long would buy them time now. The Empire would need to assemble a punitive fleet. Perhaps 50 warships or more. Given the distance and logistics, it would take at least 6 months, maybe 8, before they could arrive. Morrison looked at her advisors. 6 months to prepare for an invasion that would make this first battle look like a minor skirmish. It was not much time, but humans had always excelled under pressure. She told Vexlar they had a deal. He would provide all information, and in return he and his surviving crew could leave in a shuttle with enough supplies to reach the nearest Zarkoth outpost. Vexlar was surprised by the offer. He had expected to be held prisoner or executed. Morrison explained that she wanted him to deliver a message to his empire. Earth was not to be touched. Any species that came in peace would find willing partners. Any species that came in war would find an enemy unlike anything they had encountered before. The alien commander and his surviving crew were allowed to leave in an escape shuttle. As they departed Earth's orbit, Vexlar looked back at the blue planet. His officer, Krelthas, who was also among the survivors, asked if the humans would really change everything. Vexlar nodded slowly. He said the galaxy was about to learn what happened when you tried to enslave a species that refused to submit. He prayed to his ancestors because he knew the universe would never be the same. On Earth, humanity was already transforming at an incredible pace. The Dominion's fist was being systematically dismantled. Every component was being studied and cataloged. Factories retooled for military production. Nations that had been rivals for centuries were now sharing their most classified research. Scientists worked without rest. The threat of extinction had unified the human species in a way nothing else ever could. President Morrison called a secret meeting of world leaders. She explained that 6 months was not enough time to build a fleet that could match 50 warships in open combat. But it was enough time to build weapons that would make the Zarkoth regret returning. It was enough time to turn the solar system into a fortress. And it was enough time to do what humanity had always done best when backed into a corner. They would innovate and adapt and find ways to punch far above their weight. The Prime Minister of Britain spoke about how his nation had perfected defensive warfare through centuries of history. The President of Russia talked about using the vast distances of space, the same way his ancestors had used the vastness of their territory to defeat invaders. The Premier of China discussed asymmetric warfare and how a technologically weaker force could defeat a stronger one through unconventional tactics. They all agreed on one thing. Earth would prepare for war. Not a war of conquest, but a war of survival. Humanity had been forged through countless conflicts on their own planet. Now they would show the galaxy what they had learned. Above Earth, the wreckage of the alien ship slowly tumbled in orbit, already surrounded by salvage vessels and science ships. From this debris, humanity would build its future. The message had been sent across the stars. Earth was not prey. It was a trap waiting to spring. Any species that came seeking slaves would instead find warriors who would never surrender. The Zarkoth had made a terrible mistake. They had given humanity a common enemy, and access to advanced technology, and most dangerous of all, they had given humans a reason to unite and fight with everything they had. 6 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. President Morrison stood in a command center built deep inside a mountain in Colorado. Around her, representatives from every nation worked side by side. Old borders and ancient rivalries had been set aside. Humanity had one goal now, and that was survival. Admiral Patricia Hayes was the first commander of Earth's newly formed Space Defense Force. She pulled up holographic displays showing the solar system. Red markers showed completed defenses. Yellow markers showed projects still under construction. There was still too much yellow, but they were running out of time. She told Morrison to prepare for both good news and bad news. Dr. Martinez spoke first, looking exhausted but proud. She reported that they had successfully copied the basic principles of Zarkoth shield technology. The shields were not perfect, but they worked. Mars colony was now protected. The lunar bases had shields. The major orbital stations around Earth had defensive fields that could stop energy weapons. It was a miracle of engineering accomplished in half a year. General Crawford continued the report. Every satellite orbiting Earth had been modified with weapons. Individually, they were not powerful, but there were thousands of them. Any ship entering orbit would face attacks from every direction at once. The asteroid belt had been transformed into a maze of hidden weapons platforms. Mining operations had hollowed out dozens of large asteroids and turned them into fortresses. The Zarkoth would have to search every rock to find them all. Director Hughes added that the outer solar system was now seeded with automated weapons, platforms hidden among the moons of Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus. Early warning sensors scattered throughout the Kuiper Belt. Humanity had turned their entire star system into a defensive network. The bad news came next. Admiral Hayes admitted they had only managed to build 12 prototype warships. Each one used a combination of Zarkoth technology and human innovation, but they were untested. The crews were trained as well as possible in the time available, but they had never fought a real space battle. Morrison asked if the ships would be ready. Hayes said they would have to be. There was no more time. 2 days ago, the early warning sensors had detected the Zarkoth fleet. 50 warships, just as Commander Vexlar had predicted. They would arrive at the solar system within 72 hours. Across Earth, people worked without stopping. In laboratories at MIT, a scientist named Alan Foster perfected something called kinetic swarm missiles. Each missile carried 1,000 small projectiles that would separate on approach and overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer numbers. At the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, engineers finished construction of massive railguns. These weapons used electromagnetic fields to launch projectiles at speeds that approached a significant fraction of light speed. The destructive power was immense. In Japan, Captain Yuki Tanaka coordinated with robotics companies to produce the final batches of autonomous combat drones. These machines would operate in the vacuum of space and were programmed to sacrifice themselves if it meant destroying an enemy ship. Each drone carried enough explosives to cripple a Zarkoth vessel if it could get close enough. In the deserts of Australia, a weapon unlike anything humans had created before neared completion. It was a massive energy cannon built into the ground itself. The weapon could focus electromagnetic radiation into a beam, powerful enough to burn through starship armor. A man named Jackson Price oversaw the final tests. The first test had carved a canyon into the desert. The second test had vaporized a satellite in orbit. The weapon worked, but it needed 30 seconds to charge between shots and drained so much power that shield generators had to be shut down while it fired. But not all preparation was about technology. In military academies around the world, officers studied the brief battle that had occurred 6 months earlier. They analyzed every decision and every tactic. Colonel Jake Morrison, who had led the defense at Dallas, now taught at West Point. His classroom was always full of students eager to learn. He explained that the Zarkoth had made critical mistakes. They assumed humans would react with fear and panic. They did not understand that humanity had spent its entire existence preparing for war. Every conflict taught lessons. Every battle added to their knowledge. He showed footage of the ground combat and pointed out how human soldiers had adapted in real time. When direct fire failed, they used explosives. When explosives were not enough, they used the environment and terrain. They thought and adjusted and survived. A student asked how humans had won when the aliens were individually superior fighters. Morrison explained that war was not about individual combat. It was about systems and logistics and coordination. The Zarkoth had been winning for so long they had become overconfident. They forgot the fundamentals. Humans could never afford to forget, because they had been fighting each other for thousands of years. In orbit around Earth, the warship Independence prepared for battle. Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge surrounded by his crew. They were a mix of former astronauts and military pilots and civilian volunteers who had proven themselves in the first battle. His second-in-command, Sophie Turner, ran the crew through another combat drill. She called out orders and the crew responded, but there were still small delays. She told Brooks they needed to be faster. If they could not cut 2 more seconds from their response time, they would take damage they could not survive in a real fight. Brooks told her they would train until they could do it in their sleep. They ran the drill again and again. Every member of the crew knew their lives and possibly the survival of humanity depended on how well they performed. There was no room for error. As the deadline approached, humanity deployed its final surprise. In a secret facility beneath Geneva, Dr. Martinez led an international team working on something called Project Checkmate. Commander Vexler had mentioned that hyperspace travel could be disrupted by gravitational anomalies. The scientists realized they could use this. If they generated a strong enough artificial gravity, well, they could pull ships out of hyperspace early. They could force the Zarkoth to enter the solar system at a location of humanity's choosing. Martinez explained the concept to President Morrison during a briefing. If it worked, they could control where the enemy fleet appeared. They could have all their weapons aimed and ready. It would give humans every possible advantage. The project required massive amounts of power and technology that humanity barely understood. But they had built it anyway because the alternative was letting the enemy choose the battlefield. Admiral Hayes called a meeting of all senior commanders 2 days before the expected arrival. She told them bluntly that humans would not win through superior strength. They would win by being smarter and more ruthless than any species the Zarkoth had fought before. They would use every trick they knew. They would make the aliens pay for every meter of space. They would show the galaxy that Earth could not be conquered. She displayed a quote from an ancient human military strategist on the main screen. It said that plans were useless, but planning was essential. Hayes explained that they had done all the planning possible. Now they would have to adapt to whatever the enemy did. She reminded them that this was not just about winning one battle. This was about the future of the human species. This was about proving that humanity belonged among the stars as equals, not as slaves. The commanders dispersed to their posts across the solar system. On Mars Colony and Luna Base, on hidden platforms in the asteroid belt, on the 12 warships that represented humanity's hope. On Earth itself, where billions of people waited and watched and prayed, then the sensors detected it. The Zarkoth fleet had arrived at the edge of the solar system. 50 massive warships, each one designed to conquer and destroy. Admiral Hayes took a deep breath and opened a channel to all human forces. She said simply that it was time. The enemy was here. Now humanity would show them what happened when you threatened Earth. President Morrison activated the global broadcast system. She told the people of Earth that the aliens were coming. Everyone had known this day would arrive. They had prepared for it. Now they would prove that humans would never surrender. They would show the galaxy why you did not try to enslave the human race. Across the solar system, millions of humans heard her words and prepared themselves. The weapons were ready. The traps were set. The soldiers were in position. Humanity was about to fight for its survival and its freedom. The Zarkoth thought they were coming to finish what they started. Instead, they were about to learn the hardest lesson of their existence. The Zarkoth fleet arrived exactly where humanity wanted them to arrive. Project Checkmate had worked perfectly. The artificial gravity well pulled them out of hyperspace near the orbit of Neptune. Admiral Tharkesh commanded the punitive fleet from his flagship called the Inevitable Conquest. He had read Commander Vexillar's reports with a mixture of disbelief and anger. A primitive species damaging a Zarkoth warship seemed impossible. Vexillar must have been incompetent or cowardly. Tharkesh would not make the same mistakes. He ordered his ships to begin scanning for defensive installations. He wanted to know every weapon the humans had before his fleet reached their planet. 50 warships would be more than enough to crush any resistance. The humans would learn what happened when they defied the Empire. His sensor officer reported detecting hundreds of artificial objects throughout the solar system, satellites around the inner planets, and significant activity in the asteroid belt. Tharkesh dismissed it as primitives playing with basic technology. He ordered the fleet to maintain course for the third planet. The first trap sprung near the orbit of Uranus. Hidden weapons platforms that had been waiting in silence suddenly activated. Missiles and kinetic projectiles streaked toward the Zarkoth fleet. The aliens were not trying to destroy the ships because that was impossible with their limited technology. But they were trying to hurt them and slow them down. Tharkesh ordered his point defense systems to destroy the platforms. But as soon as his ships eliminated the visible weapons more activated from hidden positions, the humans had seeded the entire outer solar system with automated defenses. Each one that fired forced the fleet to slow down and respond. Each attack used up ammunition and energy that would not be available later. In the command center on Earth, Admiral Hayes watched the tactical display with satisfaction. She told President Morrison that Phase 1 was working. The aliens were being forced to fight their way through the solar system. Every shot they took now was one less they would have at Earth. General Crawford reported that the enemy fleet was already showing caution. They were sweeping the space ahead of them, which slowed their advance significantly. The Zarkoth fleet reached the asteroid belt and found themselves entering a three-dimensional maze. Thousands of rocks floated in a wide band around the sun. Scanning each one was time-consuming. Tharkesh ordered his fleet to disperse and sweep the region. He wanted every human installation destroyed. Hidden among those asteroids were volunteers who had accepted one-way missions. Colonel Jake Morrison commanded Outpost 17, which was a hollowed-out asteroid armed with modified Zarkoth weapons. His team included people from a dozen nations, all united by one purpose. They would make the enemy pay dearly for every meter of space. Morrison told his team to wait until the alien fleet was fully committed to searching the belt. They needed to let the Zarkoth spread out and think they were in control. The aliens moved between asteroids, scanning and occasionally destroying rocks they thought might contain weapons. Then Morrison gave the order to attack. Throughout the asteroid belt, dozens of hidden outposts opened fire simultaneously. These were not the weak weapons that had harassed the fleet earlier. These were full military installations using technology reverse-engineered from the Dominion's fist. Energy beams and missiles came from every direction. The Zarkoth found themselves in a kill zone with threats coming from above and below on all sides. Admiral Tharkesh watched his tactical display light up with warnings. Ships reported hull breaches and shield failures. The humans had been hiding their strongest weapons, waiting for the perfect moment. One of his ships was rammed by an asteroid that suddenly activated engines and drove itself into the hull at high speed before exploding. The humans were using suicide tactics. Tharkesh ordered the fleet to reform and retreat from the belt. They had lost 3 ships and several more were damaged. His mandibles clicked in frustration. These primitives were more dangerous than he had believed. He ordered the fleet to bypass the asteroid belt and proceed directly to Earth. They would deal with the installations after securing the planet. As the Zarkoth fleet approached Mars, they encountered humanity's Space Defense Force. 12 warships that looked like crude copies of alien vessels. Tharkesh almost laughed at the sight. 12 ships against 50. The humans were brave but foolish. Captain Daniel Brooks sat on the bridge of the Independence looking at the overwhelming force approaching. He opened a channel to all human warships. He reminded them they were not here to win but to buy time and do as much damage as possible. Every second they delayed the enemy was another second for Earth to prepare. The 12 human warships opened fire, focusing on the already damaged Zarkoth vessels. Their weapons were weaker than the originals, but they had been optimized based on 6 months of study. They aimed for weak points and damaged sections. Commander Sophie Turner called out evasive maneuvers. The Independence rolled and twisted, avoiding return fire with moves no Zarkoth ship could match, because human crews could handle higher acceleration forces. The battle was brutal and short. The human fleet used every tactic they had learned. They hid behind Mars and its moons. They coordinated their fire to overwhelm individual targets. 2 human ships deliberately rammed damaged alien vessels, destroying them both. Brooks ordered the retreat when half his fleet was gone. The surviving warships jumped to defensive positions around Earth. Tharkesh counted his losses. He had entered the solar system with 50 ships. Now he had only 42 and many were damaged. The humans had cost him 8 warships and they had not even reached the planet yet. But Earth was visible now and he could see their orbital defenses. He ordered his fleet to target the major cities on the surface. When the humans saw their homes burning, they would surrender. Before he could give the firing order, Earth struck back. The massive energy cannon in Australia fired. Its beam crossed space in seconds and slammed into the inevitable conquest. The shields held but barely. A second beam from an identical weapon in Chile struck before the shields could fully recover. They failed completely. Tharkesh shouted orders as his ship shuddered. Then thousands of weapon satellites around Earth opened fire. The Zarkoth fleet found itself caught in a crossfire from the planet's surface and orbit and the moon. Every weapon humanity had built in 6 months fired at once. Energy beams and missiles and kinetic projectiles and experimental weapons converged on the alien ships. Jackson Price coordinated the ground-based weapons from Australia. He implemented a targeting pattern that focused overwhelming firepower on single ships one at a time. The aliens could not defend against attacks coming from so many directions. Sections of their hulls began to fail. Atmosphere vented into space. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds were dying above Earth. Tharkesh tried to rally his fleet. He ordered them to focus fire on the surface installations. If they could destroy the ground weapons, they might still win. But that decision was his fatal mistake. The moment the Zarkoth concentrated on Earth's surface, every hidden weapon in the solar system struck. Captain Yuki, Tanaka's drone swarms launched from bases on the moon. Thousands of autonomous machines swarmed toward the alien fleet like angry insects. The remaining human warships, led by Captain Brooks, came in for close-range attacks, accepting damage to deliver killing blows. Colonel Morrison and the survivors in the asteroid belt fired every weapon they had left. Dr. Martinez activated the gravity generators, but reconfigured to disrupt the alien ship's ability to coordinate their defenses. The organized Zarkoth fleet dissolved into chaos. They were fighting in every direction against enemies that refused to follow normal combat rules. The inevitable conquest took another direct hit from the Australian energy cannon. This time the beam carved completely through the ship from front to back. Tharkesh knew he had lost. His fleet was being destroyed. He ordered all ships to retreat and jump to hyperspace immediately. But the gravity generators made jumping difficult. Several ships that tried were torn apart entering unstable jump windows. Others were destroyed by human weapons as they tried to escape. Of the 50 warships that entered the solar system, only 17 made it out. They jumped away carrying news of their defeat. In the command center on Earth, people cheered as the tactical display showed the retreating alien fleet. Admiral Hayes called for damage reports. The numbers came in over the following hours. Humanity had lost 7 of 12 warships. Most automated platforms were destroyed. Thousands of volunteers in the asteroid belt had died. There was damage to cities where some alien weapons had struck, but Earth still stood. Humanity was wounded but alive and free. They had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy. Admiral Tharkesh transmitted his report to the Zarkoth High Command. He designated humans as Class Alpha threat, possibly Class Omega. He recommended immediate quarantine of their star system. He explained that humans did not fear death. They did not surrender. They learned from every battle and adapted constantly. He said Earth must be avoided at all costs. 6 months later, President Morrison stood before the United Nations. Her speech was broadcast not just across Earth, but to every star system within range. She identified herself and told any listening species that the Zarkoth had tried to enslave human.